Abandoned and injured, he wasn't seeking shelter for himself. When he stumbled into that house, everyone assumed it was hunger. But upon seeing what he was carrying in his teeth, even the toughest man knelt down, deeply moved. Ethan Walker had always considered himself a practical man, one who relied on logic and procedure to navigate life's uncertainties. Yet logic offered little comfort on that cold, moonless night when everything seemed to conspire against him. The old clock in the hallway struck midnight just as the wind howled, rattling the panes of his countryside home. He had inherited this house a few months ago, a rustic property located at the edge of a thick patch of forest. By day, the woods were tranquil, even picturesque, but at night they cast shadows that whispered of hidden secrets. Earlier that evening, Ethan had been poring over legal documents related to the estate. He never quite wanted to live in this solitary place, but circumstances gave him few choices. His parents, now gone, had left him this secluded house, 2 stories of creaking floors, a wraparound porch, and a yard enclosed by a half-broken fence. Although he craved the hustle of the city, he had no family left to return to, so he let the tall pine trees and silent nights become his reluctant companions. He tried to focus on his reading, but an unease in the pit of his stomach distracted him. A storm was forming outside, swirling up fierce gusts that battered the windows. The air pressure dropped, and with it came an odd heaviness he couldn't quite shake. He put his papers away and checked his phone, seeing no new messages. No surprise there. His solitude was practically absolute. Usually the only life he heard at this hour was the distant hooting of owls or the cry of a fox in the underbrush. Tonight, however, even the nocturnal creatures seemed silent. Ethan flicked off the living room lamp, leaving the house lit only by a single overhead bulb in the foyer. As he crossed the threshold into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, he heard a thump, a dull, sudden noise as though something had collided with the back door. His heart jolted. He stood still for a moment, hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. The overhead light buzzed faintly, and he could hear the wind outside pressing leaves and twigs against the walls. Another thump, louder this time, reached his ears. He inched toward the back door, every hair on his body standing on end, though he tried to cling to rationality. Maybe the wind had torn a branch loose and slammed it against the door. Possibly a raccoon or stray cat rummaged for food. That seemed likely enough. He told himself it was no reason to panic, but then a sharp scraping noise made him freeze. It was the sound of claws, or something like it, scratching against the wooden door. Ethan felt his pulse pounding in his temples. There was a sudden hush, as if the entire forest had held its breath. Then, abruptly, a crash. The back door burst inward, splinters flying from the door frame as something large forced its way inside. Ethan scrambled back, overturning a chair. It hit the floor with a clatter that mingled with the roar of wind and a startling bark that echoed off the walls. A German shepherd, gaunt and soaked from the storm, stood panting in the doorway. His coat, a mixture of black and tan, was plastered to his ribs. The wet fur accentuated his prominent bones. Ethan could see right away how ragged the animal looked. One of its ears was torn, and a line of dried blood crusted over the dog's right hind leg. The shepherd glared with eyes that seemed almost feverish, both from desperation and pain. Yet behind that intensity, there was something else, a flicker of resolve. For a moment, man and dog locked eyes. The air was tense, lightning illuminating the yard behind the animal as thunder rumbled. The shepherd growled, but his body posture was uncertain, neither fully attacking nor retreating. Ethan's heart hammered wildly, the old trauma of his own childhood dog bite rushing back. He had grown up skittish of big dogs, ever since a neighbor's Rottweiler latched onto his arm after a minor provocation. His scars from that incident were faint on his skin but vivid in his memory. He vowed never to own a dog again, never to let one close enough to hurt him. But this shepherd seemed equally terrified and cornered. Water dripped from its belly onto the floorboards, forming little puddles. Ethan's mind spun. Why had it forced its way inside? Hunger? Desperation? The dog's muzzle twitched, revealing canines that looked sharper under the flickering overhead light. Outside, a lightning bolt stretched across the sky, throwing bright arcs across every window. "Easy," Ethan whispered, pressing himself against the kitchen wall, trying to keep as much distance as possible. He had no weapon, no plan. Anger flared in him. What if this dog was diseased or rabid? Fear twisted in his gut, but something else sparked inside him too. Empathy. As much as he hated to admit it, he could see the shepherd was in bad shape, panting heavily, refusing to place weight on the wounded back leg. The dog's entire body trembled. Whether from cold or agony, Ethan couldn't tell. They remained locked in that standoff for seconds, which felt like hours. The shepherd's gaze darted around, taking in the cluttered kitchen, the half-packed boxes, the dim glow of a single overhead bulb. Finally, the dog stepped forward with a limp, nails scraping the floor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He scanned the kitchen for something, anything, to use as a shield. His eyes landed on a broom leaning by the fridge. If the shepherd lunged, he could, what? Fight it off? Guilt rose in him. The creature was obviously suffering. Another small step, and the dog let out a short bark that was less a threat and more a panicked cry. It was as if the shepherd was trying to speak, to plead. Thunder boomed again, shaking the house. The overhead bulb flickered, threatening to cast them into darkness. Instinct took over. "All right," Ethan murmured, forcing calm into his voice. "Easy, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." He remembered reading somewhere that dogs responded to tone. Keeping his movements slow, he shifted sideways, inching toward the sink. The shepherd didn't move to attack. Instead, the dog watched him, eyes locked, as if determining if Ethan was friend or foe. Ethan found a bowl in the sink and, with painstaking caution, filled it with water. "You look thirsty," he said, voice trembling only slightly. He placed the bowl on the ground, then retreated a few steps. The shepherd's ears flicked. He sniffed the air, warily eyeing Ethan, but the lure of fresh water was too strong. The dog limped forward, muzzle lowered, and plunged his nose into the bowl, gulping noisily. Adrenaline still pumped through Ethan's veins, but seeing the shepherd drink with such desperation tugged at the edges of his sympathy. It was likely the dog had been wandering in the storm, perhaps for days without proper food or shelter. The wound on its hind leg looked nasty. Torn fur and congealed blood left a gap in the otherwise striking coat. The fact that this German shepherd had risked entering a stranger's home in the dead of night spoke volumes about its desperation. Once the dog finished drinking, it raised its head. Water dribbled from its chin. The shepherd let out a ragged huff and stared at Ethan again. In the flash of lightning from outside, Ethan could see the creature's eyes glistening with something that wasn't purely animal fear. It was almost as though the shepherd needed to communicate something. Another bark reverberated through the kitchen, a short, high bark that made Ethan shudder. All right, Ethan muttered, placing a hand out as though trying to calm a skittish child. He had no clue how to handle this, but he took a slow step away from the wall. The dog tensed but didn't attack. It just kept looking at him, panting. "Listen, if you're hungry, I might have something." He rummaged in the fridge, pulling out leftover roast chicken from the night before. The shepherd's nose twitched. Ethan tossed a small piece onto the floor, well away from his own feet. The dog hobbled closer, sniffed the morsel, then devoured it in seconds. Outside, the wind battered the house and rain pelted the windows in an unrelenting fury. The overhead bulb flickered again, then steadied. Ethan's mind spun with questions. Had the dog run away from an abusive owner? Was it lost? Why break into this specific house? He felt the ring of keys in his pocket, a silly reminder that locked doors weren't much protection against a determined creature. When the shepherd finished the piece of chicken, it looked at Ethan again. "There's more," Ethan said, his voice gentle. He crouched down, ignoring the tremor in his legs. The dog's growl had subsided, replaced by short, anxious whines. Slowly, Ethan slid another piece of meat across the floor, watching as the shepherd devoured it. "You're in rough shape," Ethan whispered, noticing again the raw wound on the dog's leg. Maybe he should call a vet. But at this hour, the nearest clinic was miles away, and the roads would be treacherous from the storm. Another roll of thunder sounded, making the windows rattle. The next moment was unexpected. The shepherd limped forward and pressed its nose against Ethan's knee. Ethan froze, the shock of contact momentarily overriding his fear. The dog's breath was ragged, hot from panting. In that instant, Ethan felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a sensation of compassion so sharp it was almost painful. This dog, battered and limping, had forced its way inside not simply to scavenge, but perhaps to seek help. Ethan exhaled shakily. He carefully, tentatively reached out, letting the back of his hand hover near the shepherd's head. The dog sniffed his knuckles, then gave a small whine. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, Ethan gently rested his palm on the dog's scruffy neck, feeling the wet fur beneath his fingers. The shepherd didn't pull away. Instead, it closed its eyes for a brief moment, as though taking solace in the warmth of a human touch after who knew how long on the run. Lightning flashed again, accompanied by a deafening crack of thunder that made them both jump. The dog's nails scrabbled on the floor. Without thinking, Ethan steadied the shepherd by sliding his other hand under its belly. The dog trembled fiercely, pain and fear swirling beneath that strong exterior. "Easy," Ethan repeated. "You're safe now." In that fragile pause, the wind outside seemed to lessen, as though the storm itself held its breath to witness this moment between a wary man and a wounded animal. Ethan realized with an odd pang that, in comforting the dog, he found an unexpected comfort himself. For the first time since inheriting this lonely house, he felt less alone. He let out a long sigh. "I can't just leave you like this," he murmured. His mind churned. Could he manage to clean the dog's wound, keep it calm through the storm? What if it had something contagious? Yet each doubt was tempered by the sight of those exhausted eyes. He remembered how once, as a frightened child, he'd wished someone would simply pick him up, assure him everything would be okay. In that fleeting second, he resolved to at least try. He'd see if the shepherd would let him bandage that wound. He'd keep the dog warm through the storm and figure out the rest later. "All right," he said softly, as much to himself as to the creature. "Stay with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll see what we can do." In a distant clap of thunder, the storm reminded them it was far from over. But inside this old house, barely furnished, boxes still unpacked, two lonely souls had found an unlikely truce. A practical man who feared dogs, and a German shepherd who had risked everything to force an encounter. Ethan gave the shepherd another piece of chicken, and the dog rested on the floor by his feet, eyes half closed, tail giving a timid wag. Neither knew that this meeting, fueled by desperation and unexpected kindness, would unravel secrets neither had planned to share. The dark hush of night stretched ahead, filled with unknown possibilities, and so began the first step of a journey that would challenge all of Ethan's beliefs about trust, loyalty, and the bonds between humans and the abandoned creatures who dare to reach out to us, even if it means breaking down doors in the middle of a raging storm. The morning light found Ethan slumped in a makeshift bed of blankets on the living room floor, not far from the German shepherd who had taken refuge in his home. Rain still tapped gently on the windows, but the violence of the storm had subsided to a soft drizzle. The house felt oddly peaceful, as though the turmoil of the night before had never happened. Ethan opened his eyes, disoriented at first. then remembered the events that had shattered his quiet life. The shepherd lay curled on a towel Ethan had placed near the fireplace, which he'd lit to keep them both warm. Old ashes and kindling had been there from previous owners, and he'd found just enough dry wood to stave off the night's chill. He rubbed his face, wincing as he realized he'd slept in his clothes, stiff from tension and the cold floor. The dog lifted its head, one ear standing while the torn ear flopped to one side. Exhaustion was etched into the shepherd's posture, yet he still watched Ethan intently. It wasn't the look of a dog expecting aggression. It was more cautious, as if taking measure of how the day might unfold. The flicker of recognition in those eyes pulled at Ethan's lingering fear and twisted it into a strange resolve. "Morning," Ethan murmured, feeling slightly foolish talking to a dog. He sat up, knees protesting from too many hours on the hardwood. The shepherd's tail gave a tentative wag, just once. Ethan exhaled. "So you made it through the night." He had half expected the dog to disappear by morning, as if the midnight visitation had been nothing more than a fever dream. But here the shepherd was, still limping, still in need of help. He rose carefully, mindful of the dog's watchful gaze, and stepped into the kitchen. A sense of unreality clung to him as he noted the splintered remains of the broken back door. He could see how the lock had been forced from the frame, but he still couldn't imagine the desperation that drove the animal to break in. He felt a pang of guilt for the initial terror he had displayed. Now that the adrenaline had faded, an odd kinship to the dog tugged at him. They were both alone in a way, adrift in lives they hadn't chosen. He turned on the faucet and filled a glass with water, half expecting the pipes to rattle. This old house was forever protesting its age, but the water flowed clear. He drank in silence, replaying the prior night. The crash, the trembling, the fear, his own and the shepherd's. Then he peered into the living room again, where the dog had begun grooming his injured leg with slow, deliberate licks. Ethan frowned, worried infection might set in. He opened a cupboard, rummaging for a first aid kit he'd seen while unpacking. Carefully, he collected bandages, antiseptic, and gauze. He also grabbed a bottle of pain relievers, unsure if they would be relevant. He'd never doctored a dog's wound before. Approaching the shepherd with methodical slowness, he lowered himself to the floor and placed the supplies within reach. "Look, I'm no vet," he said, as if the dog could parse his meaning. "But we need to get that leg cleaned." He inched closer, watching the shepherd's reaction. The dog's nose twitched, but he showed no hostility. Still, Ethan's heart hammered. His childhood fear lingered in the background, reminding him of teeth and jaws that once latched onto him without warning. "All right, boy," Ethan whispered. "Let's see if you'll let me help." He gently placed a folded towel beneath the dog's injured leg. The shepherd tensed, but did not pull away. As carefully as he could, Ethan began cleaning around the torn flesh. Dried blood flaked off, and he winced at the sight of raw skin. The dog let out a low whine, half turning his head, but stayed in place. One shaky breath at a time, Ethan dabbed antiseptic. "I know, it stings," he murmured, his own skin prickling with empathy. He could see how valiantly the shepherd tried to remain still. When he finished, he wound gauze around the dog's leg and secured it with medical tape. "Good job," he said, voice trembling with relief. The dog's breathing had gone shallow, but his eyes stayed locked on Ethan's face. The moment felt strangely intimate, and Ethan felt the corners of his mouth tug upward. "Guess we're stuck with each other now." He stood and opened the fridge to see what else he could feed his unexpected guest. Leftover rice, a can of tuna. His own supplies were limited since grocery runs were few and far between. He chose the tuna, mixing it with plain rice in a bowl. The shepherd's ears perked, his tail thumping the towel when Ethan set the food before him. The dog devoured the meal in seconds, clearly famished. Ethan glanced at the broken door. Normally, he'd have driven into town for repairs, but the roads would be muddy after the storm. Besides, leaving the dog alone in a house he could barely secure didn't seem wise. He needed a plan. Maybe call the local vet, or ask the only neighbor he'd met, a man named Vern who lived a mile away, for recommendations on dealing with a wounded stray. Reaching for his phone, Ethan found the battery nearly dead. He mentally cursed. His car was operational, presumably, but the thought of traveling on slick country roads made him hesitate. He considered the dog once more. The shepherd, belly finally full, had curled up, muzzle resting between his paws. Dark eyes gazed expectantly at Ethan. "If I'm taking care of you," Ethan muttered, rummaging for a charger. "I can't just keep calling you boy. You need a name." He wasn't sure how to name a dog he barely knew. He remembered a story he'd once read about a brave shepherd called Duke, but the idea of naming this battered animal after a majestic dog in some heroic tale felt strange. "Let's hold off, yeah?" He smiled wryly at the shepherd. "We'll figure it out." He plugged in his phone, watching the battery icon flicker to life. Slowly, he paced the living room, stepping around the boxes he hadn't bothered to unpack. It struck him that he and this dog were both trying to adjust to new circumstances. Something about that realization twisted at his chest, though he couldn't quite say why. Before the day's calm replaced the anxiety of the storm, he needed to check on the property. "Stay," he told the shepherd, who blinked as if in acknowledgement. Ethan grabbed a coat, then braced himself against the cool drizzle outside. He circled the house, noting the scattered branches and soggy leaves. The ground was soggy enough to swallow footprints, but he saw the distinct tracks of large paws near the back door. It unnerved him to realize the dog had paced around for a while before finally forcing the door open. He noticed something else by the porch steps, a piece of cloth snagged on a nail. Frowning, Ethan knelt and picked it up. It was a scrap of blue fabric, torn and stained. It didn't look like the typical material one might find on a piece of old clothing. Could it be from a collar? But if so, it seemed oddly rigid, perhaps part of some protective gear or harness. He found no identification tag or writing, just the stiff shred that told him the shepherd might not have been a simple stray. The wind carried a faint odor of pine and damp earth. He pocketed the fabric, uncertain if it would matter later, but unwilling to discard a potential clue. When he returned indoors, the dog lifted his head, relieved. Ethan shrugged off the coat and set it aside. Then he picked up the piece of cloth, showing it to the shepherd. "Does this mean anything to you?" he asked, half amused at himself for speaking as if the dog might answer. The shepherd tilted his head, sniffed the air, then let out a soft huff, neither confirming nor denying any significance. Ethan dropped the cloth on a side table. His phone buzzed with the faint signal it managed to pick up. A single text from Vern. "Heard about the storm. Everything all right over there?" The man was kind enough, though Ethan had only met him once. He quickly typed a reply. "Storm caused damage, but I'm fine. Unexpected guest. Might need a vet. Any suggestions?" He hit send, hoping Vern would respond soon. Meanwhile, the shepherd had risen, hobbling slowly across the living room. Anxiety flickered in the dog's eyes with each step, yet there was a dogged determination in his posture. He approached the front window, where rain still slid down in meandering lines, and peered through the glass as though searching for something. Ethan, perplexed, watched the shepherd's taut body language. It was as if the dog expected someone, or something, to appear. Then he turned and limped back toward Ethan. A soft whine rose in the shepherd's throat. Ethan set his phone down and crouched again, letting the dog come closer. The shepherd gazed at him with a desperation that seemed beyond simple hunger or pain. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked quietly. The dog's gaze flicked to the window, then back to Ethan. Could it be looking for its owner? Or was it fleeing from someone who had hurt it? Ethan's curiosity churned, fueled by the wounded dog's refusal to simply relax despite shelter and a meal. Moments later, his phone vibrated. Vern had replied with the number of a veterinarian. The text mentioned that the vet's clinic was an hour's drive away, but she sometimes made house calls for emergencies. Relief flooded Ethan as he copied the phone number. He didn't like the idea of rickety country roads in the aftermath of a storm, but this shepherd clearly needed professional care. At the very least, the dog's leg might require stitches or medication. Ethan inhaled, then dialed. His call went to voicemail on the first try. He left a message, stumbling over his words. "Hello, Dr. West. My name is Ethan Walker. I have a wounded German shepherd here. It's urgent. Could you call me back? The address is 27 Thorn Road." He ended the call, trying not to feel too discouraged. "Might be a while," he told the shepherd. The dog blinked slowly, lowering himself to the floor again as though exhausted by his own pacing. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. He retrieved another blanket from a box, laying it down near the fireplace. The shepherd sniffed at it, then carefully settled onto the soft fabric. In the distance, the hush of drizzle seemed to intensify, drawing the day into a subdued lull. "Guess we're both stuck," Ethan murmured as he dropped onto the couch, the cushions sagging beneath his weight. Outside, the gray sky made it hard to tell morning from afternoon. The storm's aftermath remained in swaying branches and dark puddles. With the door broken, with no immediate help, and with a hurting dog in need of more than he could provide, Ethan had no choice but to wait. Strangely, he felt no panic. The shepherd's quiet presence settled an emptiness Ethan had carried since moving here. Perhaps taking care of this dog would help him face the still unpacked boxes, the unresolved grief, and the lost sense of home. He gazed across at the wounded animal who had closed his eyes, the bandaged leg resting on the blanket. "You'll have a name eventually," Ethan muttered. "And maybe we'll figure out why you showed up here of all places." The shepherd's only reply was a soft huff, as though, for now, rest was all that mattered. So they let the hush of a damp morning wrap them in uneasy peace, each tethered to the other by chance or by fate, in a silent pact that neither fully understood yet. The day passed in a quiet blur, each hour marked by the hesitant footsteps of the injured shepherd or Ethan's anxious glances at his silent phone. Dr. West had not returned the call, leaving Ethan to piece together some sort of plan on his own. He devoted part of the afternoon to blocking off the damaged back entrance, at least well enough to keep out any draft or stray wildlife. By stacking wooden boards and old crates, he improvised a barrier that would hold temporarily. Despite his meager efforts, he worried about security. Something about how violently the dog had forced its way inside made Ethan uneasy. If desperation had propelled the shepherd to smash the door, what else might be out in those woods, or who else? A chill went through him that had nothing to do with the damp air. Throughout the day, the German shepherd watched him with unwavering intensity. If Ethan moved from one room to another, he felt the dog's gaze follow, as though measuring each decision. Once or twice, Ethan suspected the dog recognized certain items in the house, like the battered flashlight in the living room or the pair of boots near the foyer, because whenever Ethan picked them up, the dog's ears lifted in a flash of awareness. It was a subtle reaction, but distinct enough to stir curiosity. Could the shepherd have been trained for some purpose? By late afternoon, Ethan found himself seated at the kitchen table, flipping through the local newspaper that Vern had dropped off earlier in the week. Stories of farmland disputes, a new road project, and rummage sales filled most pages. But one small article in the corner caught his attention. Abandoned German shepherd found near highway. Authorities seek leads. The piece was short, mentioning a dog matching the shepherd's rough description spotted along Highway 54, not far from Ethan's rural area. No known owner had come forward, though locals suspected it had been left behind by travelers. The article ended with a simple line: "Anyone with information, contact County Animal Control." Glancing toward the living room, Ethan studied the dog dozing by the fireplace. That short article couldn't possibly be about him, could it? On a whim, he snatched his phone, opened a browser, and searched for references to missing dogs or suspicious situations involving German Shepherds. His connection was spotty, but after a few slow-loading pages, he stumbled on a vague mention of a dog fitting this description, rumored to have been part of an illegal training operation. The details were murky, referencing a remote facility that might have used dogs for unauthorized security drills. The post was unverified, but it left Ethan unsettled. Something about the dog's demeanor, the hypervigilance, the way he moved with a certain discipline, hinted at more than an ordinary stray. Yet the shepherd's thin frame and injuries suggested prolonged neglect. The puzzle gnawed at Ethan's mind. In the final hours of daylight, the rain subsided, and a faint glow of evening sun broke through the clouds. Encouraged by the change in weather, Ethan decided to step outside for a breath of fresh air. He opened the front door, and the shepherd immediately perked up, hobbling toward him. "Easy," Ethan said. "You can stay here or come if you like. Just be careful on those steps." The dog blinked, then ventured onto the porch, tail lowered. They stood side by side, gazing out at the drenched yard. Birdsong returned to the trees, the world slowly drying out from the storm's onslaught. Ethan couldn't say why, but sharing that moment of quiet with the shepherd felt oddly comforting. A sudden rustle behind the fence startled them both. The shepherd stiffened instantly, ears erect, body on alert. Ethan squinted toward the noise, spotting a silhouette near the fence line. Someone in a dark jacket. Instinctively, Ethan placed a hand near the dog's shoulder, as if to keep him from racing forward. He called out, "Hello, who's there?" The figure froze. For a moment, Ethan thought it might be Vern checking in, but the silhouette was taller, leaner. Without a word, the stranger hurried away, disappearing into the tree line, footsteps squishing through wet grass. The dog let out a low, menacing growl that made Ethan's neck prickle. That was no neighborly visit. He considered running after the intruder, but thought better of it. He was alone, unarmed, and the ground was slippery from the storm. The shepherd whimpered, pressing closer to Ethan, as though distressed by the presence of that stranger. Could it be related to the dog's mysterious condition? Ethan felt his pulse hammer. With adrenaline coursing through him, he coaxed the shepherd back inside, shutting the door. He rummaged for a spare piece of plywood and hammered it hastily over the broken back entrance. It wouldn't stop a determined intruder, but it offered some peace of mind. He double-checked the front door's lock and closed all windows. Paranoia hummed in his thoughts, urging him to consider calling the authorities. But what would he report? A suspicious figure lurking in his yard at dusk. Out here, property lines were large and ill-defined. The police might dismiss it as a harmless passerby. The shepherd stuck close as he moved from room to room, as though determined not to let Ethan out of sight. "Who was that?" Ethan muttered, though he didn't expect an answer. The dog's stance suggested a readiness to defend if needed. Twilight fell, painting the sky in muted shades of purple and gray. Ethan set about preparing something for dinner, more out of habit than hunger. He heated a can of soup, tossed a few scraps to the dog, and ate listlessly. Dr. West still hadn't called back. The sense of waiting, of looming uncertainty, made Ethan's nerves fray. At least the shepherd's wound showed no fresh bleeding. Despite the day's stress, it seemed the bandage was holding up. Now and then the dog let out a soft whine, though it was unclear if it stemmed from discomfort or anxiety. Ethan took it upon himself to speak reassuringly whenever the dog whimpered, telling him everything would be all right, though he wasn't quite sure he believed it. The night arrived gently, crickets and frogs resuming their chorus in the fields beyond the property. Ethan considered turning on a lamp in every room just for the comfort of light, but that felt too much like surrendering to fear. Instead, he settled in the living room with the overhead fixture on a low setting. The shepherd curled beside him, resting his chin on Ethan's foot. If anyone had told him a week ago he'd share a house with a strange dog, he would have laughed. Now it felt strangely natural. He reached for his phone, decided to try Dr. West again. This time the ring cut short and a weary female voice answered. Yes? Relief flooded Ethan. Hello, my name's Ethan Walker. I left a voicemail earlier. There's a German shepherd. He broke in last night, injured. Leg's pretty bad. I've done some basic first aid, but it needs professional attention. A pause crackled on the line. Yes, Mr. Walker. I'm in the middle of an emergency with a foaling mare, but I can head your way around sunrise. That's the best I can do. I understand, Ethan replied, glancing at the dog. I appreciate it. The address is 27 Thorn Road. If you come up the hill. I know the place, Dr. West interrupted. Old Burn property, right? Hasn't been lived in for years. Yes, well, I'm the new resident, he said. Thank you. See you tomorrow then. After they disconnected, Ethan let out a shaky breath. Tomorrow was hours away, but at least help was coming. Maybe Dr. West could figure out how best to treat the shepherd. More importantly, he hoped she might have insight into the dog's background. If the animal had belonged to someone with questionable intentions, Ethan needed to know. Outside, the darkness was complete, unbroken by any moonlight. He made a final check of the barricades, ensuring no one could sneak in. The memory of that lurking figure still nagged at him, though the yard was empty now. Deciding it was time to settle in, Ethan changed into clean clothes. He realized with a wry smile that he'd left most of his pajamas in boxes. He rummaged around, eventually finding an old t-shirt and sweatpants. The shepherd watched him from the hallway, tail wagging softly whenever Ethan spoke. Something about that subtle companionship chipped away at Ethan's usual wariness. Maybe it was just relief at not being alone. He retrieved another set of blankets, intending to sleep on the couch again. The dog circled around a spot on the rug, then collapsed with a groan. You're exhausted, aren't you? Ethan said gently. The dog's eyelids drooped. The day's tension had worn them both down. Flicking off the main light, Ethan kept a small lamp glowing in the corner. The house sank into quiet, the hush punctuated by distant insect chirps. He settled onto the couch, pulling the blankets up to his shoulders. For a long time, he stared at the dog's silhouette in the dim lamplight, heart heavy with questions. Who was that stranger outside? Was it mere coincidence, or connected to the shepherd's abrupt arrival? If the dog had been part of something illegal, were dangerous people searching for him? The possibility tightened Ethan's chest. At some point, he drifted off into a shallow sleep. Dreams came uninvited. He saw the dog limping through an ominous forest, shadows twisting around the trees. Then he glimpsed distant lights, men whispering instructions, a flash of chain-link fencing. In the dream, Ethan tried to call out a warning, but his voice failed. The dog vanished into darkness. Next, the stranger in the yard appeared, grin sharp under a hood, stepping closer while Ethan stood immobilized. He woke with a jolt, clammy and breathing fast. The lamp still glowed, revealing the shepherd awake, ears pricked. The dog gazed at Ethan, then let out a quiet whine as though sensing the distress. Ethan forced a calming breath. "It's all right," he whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. The clock on the wall read a little past midnight. Unable to settle back to sleep, he rose and walked to the kitchen for water. The faint sound of the refrigerator humming felt unnaturally loud in the silence. He stared at the half-barricaded back door, the wood planks forming a crude patch. The dog padded behind him, nails clicking on the floor. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said aloud, though he didn't know who he was reassuring more, himself or the shepherd. Then, driven by impulse, he opened a near-empty cupboard to check for anything that might calm the anxious churn in his stomach. Instead, he found a half-finished bottle of whiskey left by the previous occupants. He contemplated it briefly, but set it aside. This was no time to lose clarity. The dog nudged his thigh as if urging him to return to the living room. Ethan found the gesture oddly heartening. He let out a shaky laugh. "All right, I'm coming." He eased himself back onto the couch, and the shepherd curled up near his feet. The house felt too large, the night too quiet. But the presence of this battered, mysterious dog kept the suffocating loneliness at bay. Eventually, fatigue overtook him, and Ethan slipped into a dreamless doze, lulled by the rhythmic sound of the shepherd's breathing. The storm had passed, but the aftermath lingered in the tension of battered doors and the strange man outside. The next day promised answers, or so Ethan hoped. Would Dr. West's arrival shed light on the dog's condition, or raise more questions? And what of the figure who vanished into the trees at dusk? Outside, the wind whispered through damp branches. Had anyone been standing near the fence now, they would have seen a faint glow through the living room window. Two silhouettes resting in wary companionship. Neither Ethan nor the shepherd realized how soon their fragile sense of security would be tested again, for in the dense forest beyond the property, someone else was waiting, someone who had tracked the German shepherd through the storm and now marked the house with cold determination. The calm night was merely a brief respite, the hush before a new tempest of secrets that would converge on an unlikely bond between man and dog. For now, though, all was quiet. Ethan's final conscious thought was the dog's steady warmth near his feet, a small anchor in a sea of unknowns, and the shepherd, drifting into sleep, carried in his battered body both the scars of a past he could not voice and a growing trust in a stranger's gentle hand. In the hush that precedes dawn, Ethan woke to the faint rasp of nails on wood. He blinked, adjusting to the dim lamplight that still glowed from the living room corner. The German shepherd stood by the couch, tail giving a weak wag as their eyes met. Despite the dog's battered appearance, there was a quiet alertness that made Ethan's heart constrict. He swung his legs over the edge of the cushions and checked the time on his phone. Not even 5 in the morning. For a moment he wondered if he'd heard Dr. West's truck outside, but all remained silent. With a soft murmur of encouragement, he rose to stretch, limbs stiff from sleeping fully dressed. The dog tracked his every movement, a silent sentinel waiting for whatever might come next. He stepped into the hallway to confirm that no headlights had appeared along the gravel drive. The hush of early morning pressed in, broken only by the soft drip of moisture from the eaves outside. Feeling the shepherd brush against his leg, Ethan placed a comforting hand on the dog's back. Beneath the scruffy fur, the animal's ribs were alarmingly pronounced, a reminder that every hour without professional care risked infection. Ethan flicked on the kitchen light, noticing a fresh gloom in the corners where the battered door still let in drafts. A pang of relief surfaced when he remembered Dr. West was due to arrive soon. He poured himself a cup of stale coffee, microwaved it, and offered the shepherd a small portion of leftover chicken, promising that real help was on its way. By 6:30, the first glow of sun touched the treetops. With a low growl, the shepherd alerted Ethan to a dusty pickup rolling up the driveway. The sight of a woman stepping out brought a surge of hope. She wore mud-stained boots and a worn jacket, her hair twisted into a loose braid. Dr. West looked every inch the country vet. While Ethan hastened to open the door, the shepherd shuffled behind him, alternately curious and nervous. Dr. West gave a polite nod and removed a small medical kit from her passenger seat. Without fanfare, she strode inside, scanning the interior as if taking inventory of bullet points in her mind. Her gaze landed on the dog, and she crouched, speaking softly. The shepherd's ears twitched, uncertain whether to trust a stranger. "You weren't exaggerating about his leg," she said after a cursory inspection. Setting down her kit, Dr. West eased closer. The shepherd trembled under her touch but stayed put. "He's got a deep laceration, probably from something sharp. Could be barbed wire, could be a blade. Hard to say. I'll clean it properly and see if there's further trauma." Ethan hovered anxiously, describing the dog's arrival, the break-in, and the suspicious stranger glimpsed near the fence. Dr. West listened with pursed lips, eyebrows knitting. She methodically cleaned the wound, applied fresh antiseptic, and shot a mild sedative into the muscle. The shepherd whined but didn't resist. "He's tough," she murmured. "That's both good and bad. Means he's learned to tolerate a lot of pain. Let's hope the sedation takes effect soon." As the sedative calmed the shepherd, Dr. West pulled a compact scanner from her bag. "Might as well check for a microchip. Sometimes these dogs are chipped if they had owners who cared or if they came from certain groups." Her tone darkened, implying she'd seen her share of illicit breeding or training rings. She passed the device over the dog's shoulders, chest, and neck, waiting for a beep that never came. "No chip," she sighed, turning to Ethan. He might have belonged to someone who didn't want him traced, or perhaps never got him registered. Either way, I suspect there's more to his story than a simple stray. Look here. She gently lifted the shepherd's ear, revealing older scars. He's had a rough past, possibly disciplined in ways I'd rather not imagine. Dr. West administered an antibiotic shot, explaining that the dog would need a strict schedule of medication. She produced a small bottle of pills, telling Ethan to mix them with food twice daily. Those scars, the break-in. If you saw a man skulking around, I'd be cautious. Dogs like this sometimes get entangled in nasty business. Security training, guard dog breeding, even underground fighting. But I can't jump to conclusions. For now, the main thing is to ensure he's safe and stable. Ethan bit his lip, the weight of responsibility settling over him. He hadn't asked for a complicated mystery when he moved here. Yet seeing the shepherd's chest rising and falling in sedation, bandages fresh around his wound, he couldn't ignore the twinge of protectiveness that had taken root. "Should I call animal control or the police?" he asked, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Dr. West gave him a measured look. "Animal control is an option, but they're underfunded. If he's labeled dangerous, they might not handle him gently. And the police won't do much without solid evidence of wrongdoing. If you're truly concerned for your safety, let them know, but be ready for a slow response." Ethan set his jaw, recalling how the shepherd had looked at him last night, as if pleading for sanctuary. "I'll keep him here a while. I can't just hand him over to a shelter after all he's been through." Dr. West nodded approvingly. "He'll need rest and follow-up visits. Also, don't you think it's time to give him a name? Might help him relax, trusting he's part of your household now." Ethan glanced at the sleeping shepherd, noticing the steady rise and fall of his flank. A name. The question jarred him. He'd never imagined naming a dog. Dogs had always been a source of wariness. But now, he recalled the unwavering vigilance the shepherd had shown, his determination to survive. "I don't know," Ethan said, shrugging uncertainly. "Something that suggests loyalty, maybe. Guardian, ranger, or should I stick to something simpler?" He felt foolish running through possibilities out loud. Dr. West offered a small smile. "Try out a few. You'll feel it when it's right." Gathering her gear, she gave final instructions. "He'll be drowsy for a while. If you notice anything odd, fever, vomiting, or more bleeding, call me. And keep your eyes open." If someone is looking for this dog, they might not be friendly. After the vet's pickup disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan lingered on the porch. The sun had climbed higher, revealing the yard strewn with broken branches. Beyond the fence, the forest stood silent, but he couldn't shake the memory of that shadowed figure. Inside, the shepherd began to stir, sedation wearing off. Ethan returned, kneeling beside the dog as he blinked groggily. "Hey, pal," he murmured, voice soft. "The doc fixed you up as best she could. Just try not to move too fast." He tentatively tried a name. "What do you think about Ranger?" The dog's eyes flicked toward him, but gave no distinct reaction. "Okay, maybe not. Guardian? Buddy?" A faint tilt of the head was all Ethan got. He sighed, letting the question remain unanswered for now. Determined to secure the property before nightfall, Ethan set about reinforcing doors and windows. He located old planks in the shed, hammered them carefully into place, and double-checked the yard for signs of trespass. The shepherd dozed on and off, occasionally lifting his head when Ethan passed, as if making sure he was still there. After hours of chores, Ethan slumped in a chair by mid-afternoon, exhausted but resolved. Whether the stranger who fled last night had any claim on this dog remained a gnawing uncertainty. Ethan stared at the half-finished remains of a legal document on the table, wondering how swiftly his quiet life had changed. He inhaled, letting the tension settle. If a confrontation came, he refused to let fear dictate his choices. Casting one more glance at the resting shepherd, he tightened his jaw. "We'll figure this out, one step at a time," he whispered, hardly noticing how natural it felt to speak in plural. The dog's tail gave a weak thump, and for the first time, Ethan felt less alone. Late that afternoon, an unexpected text came through from Vern. "Saw an unfamiliar vehicle near your driveway. Be careful." Ethan's heart pounded as he read the message. The memory of the unknown figure by the fence flared again. He glanced around, realizing dusk would soon creep in. The shepherd stirred at his feet, eyes half-lidded but still alert to Ethan's tension. Another day was slipping away without answers. Clutching his phone, Ethan recalled Dr. West's warning. If someone had gone to great lengths to track this dog, they might not stop easily. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the hint of another coming storm. As dusk settled in for the second night in a row, Ethan circled his living room with restless energy. Vern's warning replayed in his thoughts, each repetition a reminder that something unknown hovered at the edges of his property. The German shepherd, still recovering from sedation, lay close by, ears twitching at every creak of floorboards under Ethan's pacing feet. Although the day had brought a brief sense of relief, Dr. West had come and gone, leaving him with medication and practical advice. The evening shadows ushered in a renewed apprehension. He found himself pausing by the front window, peering out at the deepening gloom, feeling as though each passing moment carried a hint of danger. His phone sat on the side table, Vern's cryptic text message glowing on the screen. "Unfamiliar vehicle near your driveway. Be careful." He couldn't shake the image of that silhouette by the fence. The dog hadn't forgotten either, judging by the occasional low growl that vibrated in the animal's throat whenever Ethan moved too close to the windows. Gingerly, Ethan checked the newly reinforced boards across the back door, praying that his makeshift repairs would suffice for now. Hungry but without an appetite, he decided to heat a frozen meal in the microwave, some discounted lasagna he'd barely remembered purchasing. The whir of the rotating plate soothed him marginally, a mundane background noise in an otherwise tense house. As the seconds ticked away, he ran a hand through his hair, noticing how badly he needed a shower and a change of clothes. But he wanted to stay alert in case anything happened. When the timer beeped, he balanced the hot container and carried it into the living room. The shepherd lifted his head, nose quivering at the smell of food. "Sorry, buddy," Ethan muttered, setting a separate bowl on the floor filled with the dog's prescribed meal plus antibiotics. "Doctor's orders. We've got to keep you on a schedule." The dog moved stiffly, tail giving a faint wag, and began to eat. Ethan sat cross-legged nearby, picking at his own lackluster dinner. The overhead light was dimmed to a warm glow, the only barrier against the thickening night. As they ate in companionable silence, Ethan thought back to how drastically his life had changed in just over 24 hours. Before the shepherd's arrival, each day blurred into the next, overshadowed by isolation and old grievances he rarely acknowledged. Now the house felt alive, if tense, as though the battered dog had brought with him an electric charge that made everything sharpen into focus. Even fear had a way of making Ethan feel more present, more certain that the decisions he made carried real weight. He cleaned up the remnants of dinner, rinsing the plates and bowls in the kitchen sink. The shepherd, satisfied, nudged its nose against Ethan's leg, as though seeking reassurance. Unsure how else to respond, Ethan knelt and carefully stroked the dog's fur near the uninjured ear. "I never really planned on having company out here," he murmured, voice hushed. "But I guess none of this was part of the plan." The dog pressed closer, eyes half closing at the gentle contact. No name had stuck yet, though Ethan had tried half a dozen. He found himself postponing a final choice, perhaps waiting for a moment that felt right. Later, he peered out the front window again, searching for headlights. Nothing. The night stretched silent except for the hush of wind in the pines. He decided to kill some time by sorting through boxes he'd left stacked in the hallway, still untouched from his move. With the shepherd trailing behind, Ethan rummaged through old books, photographs, and letters from his parents. Though the memories brought a twinge of sadness, it was better than letting paranoia reign. At one point, he pulled out a framed photo of his mother and father standing outside this very house. Their smiles were bright, brimming with optimism for the future. That was decades ago. Now both were gone, leaving him adrift in a place where their hopes echoed in quiet halls. He sighed and closed the cardboard flaps. Outside, an owl hooted, its haunting call drifting through the walls. It was nearly 9 o'clock. If Vern's tip had been right, that unknown vehicle might appear after dark. Ethan debated calling the police, but he kept returning to the same problem. He had no evidence. Suspicion alone wouldn't prompt an officer to patrol his property, not in this remote area where calls were triaged by urgency. He pictured the local deputy politely but firmly stating that they had limited resources. Another pang of frustration twisted in his gut. A sudden beep from his phone made him jump. He grabbed it, only to find a voicemail notification from an unknown number. His pulse quickened as he listened. The message crackled with static. "You have something, or someone, that doesn't belong to you," a male voice said, calm yet menacing. "Turn the dog over and we'll leave you alone. Otherwise, keep those doors locked." Then a sharp click, and the line ended. He stared at his phone, dread coursing through him. The shepherd must have sensed Ethan's anxiety, for he rose from where he'd been lying and let out a soft, uneasy whine. Ethan's hands shook, rage and fear warring inside him. The voice offered no name, no details, just a warning that made it clear the dog was at the heart of something bigger than a simple stray case. He replayed the message, hoping to glean a clue, but the connection was too poor to extract any background noise or accent. Pressing a hand to his forehead, he looked at the shepherd. "They want you back," he whispered, eyes stinging with a flush of anger. The dog whined again. In that moment, Ethan felt a fierce protectiveness surge in his chest. Whoever these people were, they had lost any claim the moment they'd abandoned or harmed this creature. The shepherd was safe here, no matter what. Determined to outlast the intimidation, Ethan hurried to the shed once more, rummaging for anything that might reinforce the windows. He found an old metal rod that could brace the front door, along with a few more boards. The house soon took on the appearance of a fortress under siege, each window locked tight. His nerves flickered every time the wind pressed against the siding. The shepherd followed him from room to room, not missing a step despite the limp. Whenever Ethan paused to listen, the dog's ears pricked as though ready to respond to any threat. By 11 o'clock, the tension reached a crescendo. Outside, the wind grew colder, stirring the pines into a restless orchestra. Ethan's heart hammered with each shadow that flickered across the yard. Then near midnight, a sharp rap sounded at the front door. Panic shot through him. He glanced around for something to use as a weapon, his mind spinning. Had these strangers come already? He forced himself to approach, cautioning the dog to stay back. "Who is it?" he called, voice wavering. A split second later, Vern's familiar baritone floated through the door, muffled but distinct. "Ethan, it's me, Vern. I saw a suspicious car turn off onto your property just now. Figured I should check up on you." Relief flooded Ethan's limbs so powerfully he nearly collapsed. He unlatched the door, opening it a crack. Vern, an older man with graying hair and a weathered face, stood on the porch, lantern in hand. He wore a thick jacket against the chill. Behind him stretched the silhouette of tall pines. The dog pressed close to Ethan's side, letting out a low growl of uncertainty. Vern raised both hands, palm out. "Hey, easy there, friend," he said softly. "I'm not here to harm anyone. I just wanted to make sure Ethan's all right." Eyeing Vern's gentle demeanor, Ethan slowly ushered the shepherd aside and opened the door enough for Vern to step in. "Sorry about that," Ethan muttered. "He's jumpy. We both are." Vern exhaled as he glimpsed the ramshackle barricades across windows and doors. "Looks like you've had quite a time," he commented, scanning the living room. "I saw an SUV parked farther down the road. Lights off, then it vanished into the trees. Thought maybe it headed your way." Ethan nodded grimly. "I got a threatening voicemail tonight. Someone wants me to surrender the dog." He paused, voice tight. "You think it's the same people you saw?" With a troubled frown, Vern scratched his chin. "I don't know, son, but this area's seen its share of shady characters. Some folks run contraband or do business in the forest. The police rarely catch them, given how large these woods are. If they want the dog, they might not give up easy." The shepherd watched Vern intently, occasionally sniffing the air as if sorting out whether he was ally or foe. Vern offered a chunk of jerky from his pocket. After a moment's hesitation, the dog accepted, though his gaze remained alert. For the next hour, they strategized. Vern recommended contacting the sheriff in the morning, if only to report harassment. With Dr. West's observations and the ominous voicemail, the authorities might be more inclined to pay attention. Still, they both recognized the possibility of a slow response time. "I can swing by tomorrow after dawn," Vern offered, "just to keep an eye on the place while you talk to the sheriff. Strength in numbers." Grateful for the solidarity, Ethan felt a surge of thankfulness at not facing this alone. "Thanks, Vern," he said quietly. "I really appreciate it. I never expected—" Vern lifted a hand. "No need to explain. This community might be spread out, but we help each other when it counts. And I like that dog's spirit. Seems he's been through more than we can imagine." The shepherd wagged his tail softly as if he understood. When Vern finally left, the hour had crept close to 1 in the morning. Ethan secured the door again, pressing his back to the wood for a moment to steady himself. The dog stared up at him. "At least we know we've got an ally," Ethan murmured. But he couldn't deny the roiling sense of anticipation that thudded through his veins. If the intruders had retreated for now, there was no guarantee they wouldn't return with greater resolve. He turned out the main lights, leaving only a soft glow in the living room. The dog yawned, flopping onto a spread of blankets near the couch, bandaged legs stiff but healing. Ethan grabbed a pillow and settled at the shepherd's side, not wanting to stray far. "We'll make it," he whispered, letting the last remnants of adrenaline fade. The wind sighed outside, brushing through the pines. He hoped Vern's watchful eye would keep trouble at bay until morning. Meanwhile, each time he closed his eyes, he saw that black SUV in the trees, lurking with intent. Despite his best efforts, sleep slipped away in fragments. The hours between midnight and dawn stretched on, every tiny sound magnified by his nerves. Sometimes he dozed, only to jerk awake at an imagined engine rumble. The shepherd kept vigil in a half-sleep, muzzle resting on Ethan's knee, ears pricking whenever the wind gusted. That closeness fortified Ethan as no locked door ever had. They were a fragile alliance, man and dog, both uncertain of the future, bound by necessity and something deeper that neither could name. At last, the faintest ribbon of gray appeared at the horizon, signaling a new dawn. Ethan felt a weary relief. They had survived another night. The dog lifted his head, blinking, then gave a resolute little shake as if to say, "Time to face whatever comes next." Ethan rose, stiff-limbed, crossing to the window. A slow exhale escaped him. No sign of that SUV, no menacing shapes by the fence, just the quiet promise of morning light. Tomorrow might bring conflict. The day might carry fresh threats. But for now, the house was still, the moment calm. Ethan placed a hand on the shepherd's neck. He could almost imagine the dog's heartbeat, matching his own unsteady rhythm. When the question of a name flickered in his mind again, he suddenly realized an answer. "You're Valor," he said, smiling at the dog's quizzical tilt of the head, "because that's what you've shown, breaking in here and surviving so much." The shepherd's tail thumped once, a silent acceptance of the name. And for a heartbeat, Ethan allowed himself to believe they might just stand firm no matter what storms threatened to descend. Morning arrived, cloaked in a fog that clung to the pines lining Ethan's driveway. Pale sunlight filtered through heavy clouds, and the distant croak of crows echoed across the damp fields. Ethan stood on the porch, gripping the railing as he scanned the property. The battered planks he'd nailed over windows and doors now seemed almost quaint in the light of day, but the memory of Vern's late-night visit and that threatening voicemail lingered. He inhaled slowly, forcing a calm he didn't entirely feel. Behind him, Valor padded out, nose lifted to catch the scent of dew and wet grass. The German shepherd showed mild stiffness as he stepped off the porch, wandering a few yards across the lawn. Ethan kept a watchful eye, recalling Dr. West's instruction not to let the dog overexert himself. He let Valor sniff around, marking new territory while the sun tried to burn away the fog. Still no sign of the suspicious SUV, no new footprints by the fence. If not for the boarded-up windows, Ethan might have convinced himself that last night's tension had been a bad dream. But the phone in his pocket was a constant reminder. He hadn't deleted the voicemail. Some stubborn part of him clung to that proof, just in case. Vern had promised to drive by mid-morning. Until then, Ethan would wait. After ensuring Valor was all right, he retreated indoors, flicking on the kitchen light to brew coffee. Cabinets still bore half-unpacked boxes, and he grimaced at the clutter. In the hour before sunrise, he'd tried to tidy, but anxious energy made it impossible to finish any single task. The coffee machine sputtered. He found himself glancing at the clock. Just past 8. The hush inside the house pressed in. Even Valor, having finished exploring, returned to curl in a corner of the living room. Ethan carried his mug to a small table near the window. He sipped the bitter coffee, wincing at its acidity. The smell reminded him of simpler times when the biggest issue was deciding which brand to buy. Now, unknown adversaries lurked somewhere along the tree line, wanting the dog back, or wanting him silenced. Ethan's lips curled in anger at the thought. He refused to abandon Valor to a fate likely worse than the injuries he'd already suffered. Maybe the sheriff would care enough to investigate. Movement by the fence line caught his attention. He set the coffee down with a clink, heart thumping. But as he peered out, he recognized Vern's old pickup bumping up the gravel path. Relief swelled. Vern parked under a sagging oak and climbed out, offering a wave. Ethan opened the door and Valor came to his side, tail tip wagging uncertainly. Vern approached slowly, letting the shepherd catch his scent. The dog relaxed upon recognizing him from the night before. "Morning," Vern greeted, stepping inside. His tired eyes scanned the barricaded windows. "No trouble overnight?" Ethan shook his head. "Not unless you count nightmares. I woke up at every little sound." Vern hummed sympathetically. "Living out here, you never realize how much the night can amplify fears until you've got reason to be jumpy." They settled in the kitchen, where Vern politely declined coffee, preferring a thermos of tea he'd brought along. He pulled out a worn notepad. "I'll head into town soon. Mention the situation to the sheriff. If you want, we can both go, though that means leaving Valor here." Ethan frowned, glancing at the dog. "I don't like the idea of him alone, but maybe it's best to be direct with the sheriff. Show that voicemail, see if he'll do something." Vern nodded, scribbling a reminder. "Do you have it saved?" Ethan retrieved his phone, pressing a couple of buttons. The ominous voice played again. "You have something, or someone, that doesn't belong to you. Turn the dog over and we'll leave you alone. Otherwise, keep those doors locked." Static hissed, then it ended. Vern's jaw tightened. "No phone number, I presume?" Ethan shook his head. "Unknown, no details, just that threat." Valor, sensing their grim mood, approached with a soft whine. Vern reached out, palm up, letting the shepherd's muzzle rest against his hand. "He's a fine dog," Vern said softly. "If he's from one of those illegal outfits, guard dog training or worse, he deserves a second chance. You're doing right by him." Ethan blinked away, the sudden sting in his eyes, heart twisting with gratitude. "Thanks. Feels like I'm in over my head. I barely know how to handle my own problems, let alone keep him safe, but I can't just let him go." "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy," Vern murmured. Then he exhaled and stood. "Let's head to the station. We'll see if the sheriff can at least patrol the area." Ethan snagged a leash Dr. West had left, an old one in her truck's supply just in case. Valor eyed it warily as Ethan clipped it to a makeshift collar. "Sorry, boy, don't want you sprinting after some critter with that leg." The dog grunted, but followed them outside. They secured him in the house with water and a comfortable bed near the fireplace. Ethan double-checked the boards on the doors, feeling a pang of guilt at leaving Valor alone. Still, Vern was right. The sheriff needed to hear this in person. He tugged on a jacket and climbed into Vern's truck, ignoring the sense of dread that flared as they rumbled down the potholed road. The drive to town took nearly half an hour, winding past farms and dense stretches of forest. Vern tried to make small talk, updates on local harvest fairs, random gossip about neighbors. Ethan managed half-hearted responses, but his mind remained back at the house, imagining every possible scenario of someone sneaking in. He forced himself to believe that the house's battered defenses, combined with the midday sun, would deter any intruders. They finally pulled up at a squat brick building with a simple sign reading County Sheriff's Office. Inside, a bored-looking deputy asked them to wait. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The whole place smelled of old coffee and musty paperwork. After what felt like an eternity, Sheriff Dunn emerged from an office, smoothing the corners of his uniform shirt. He was a large man, mid-50s, with a silver mustache and the air of someone who'd seen more chaos in life than he cared to remember. Ethan and Vern introduced themselves, then recounted the events. The dog's break-in, the suspicious figure near the fence, the threatening voicemail, and the potential involvement of criminals who wanted Valor back. Sheriff Dunn listened patiently, occasionally jotting notes. "You have that message saved?" he asked. Ethan played it, the sheriff's face settling into a stern frown. "That's not good," Dunn muttered, handing back the phone. "Unfortunately, tracking a burner phone, if that's what they used, can be tricky. But I'll file an official report. Give me your address again." Ethan provided the details. Dunn typed slowly, each keystroke echoing in the still room. "I can have a squad car cruise by once a day. Might not catch anything in the act, but it'll signal you're not alone out there." Vern cleared his throat. "Sheriff, these folks might be dangerous. You heard the tone. If they're from a bigger operation, could you spare more resources?" Dunn gave a thin-lipped smile. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Howe, but we're stretched thin. We'll watch the area. You let us know if anything else happens. Any more calls, suspicious behavior, license plates, that sort of thing." Ethan sensed that was the best they'd get. Sheriff Dunn printed a statement form, which Ethan signed, detailing every detail he could recall. Vern tried to push for a stronger response, but Dunn's calm expression remained unyielding. "If you feel threatened, call 911, the sheriff said, voice neutral. "Just be aware we can't always respond immediately. Rural calls can take a while. I advise caution, but hopefully these people realize we're involved now and keep their distance." His tone suggested he'd seen enough feuds, squatters, and unscrupulous wanderers to be jaded. Once they finished, Ethan thanked the sheriff, though the words felt hollow. On the drive back, Vern's jaw clenched. "Not much of a comfort, is it?" he muttered. "Still, at least there's a record. If they come back, we won't be starting from scratch." Ethan nodded, staring at the passing scenery. Clumps of cloud shadow drifted across farmland, and he wondered how ordinary life could continue so serenely while his felt upended. When they finally crested the hill near Ethan's property, he breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing his house intact. No strange vehicles, no forced entry. It was well past midday. "Stay for lunch?" Ethan offered, though he wasn't sure if he had more than canned soup and stale bread. Vern declined politely, glancing at his phone. "I've got errands, but I'll swing by this evening. Keep me posted." He hesitated a moment. "Be careful, Ethan, and watch your dog." Ethan stepped out, watching the truck rattle down the path. His chest felt tight as he approached the front door, keys in hand. He half expected to see footprints or broken boards, but everything was as he'd left it, reinforcing the eerie normalcy. Inside, he found Valor lying near the fireplace, ears twitching at Ethan's arrival. The dog stood, wagging his tail, though his limp made the movement uncertain. After a quick meal of toasted bread and cheese, Ethan prepared the dog's medication, mixing in shredded chicken to disguise the pills. Valor accepted the food eagerly. Ethan sank into a chair, letting out a shaky exhale. The house was warm from midday sun, yet tension prickled along his spine. At least they'd filed a report, making the threat official. That was something. But the sheriff's limited promise of a daily drive-by did little to calm him. Wanting to keep busy, he rummaged through the shed again, hauling out tools in an attempt to fix the damaged back door more permanently. Valor followed him outside, nose testing the wind. For a moment, Ethan wondered if the dog might catch a scent of the intruders who once lurked here, but Valor only stared at the distant pines. Ethan measured, sawed, hammered, sweat dampening his forehead. Each step produced loud echoes in the yard. He knew he was overcompensating, physical labor to distract from intangible fear. Still, he pressed on, determined to build a door that wouldn't splinter so easily. Valor lay in a patch of sunlight, resting. Every so often, the dog turned his head, scanning the perimeter of the property as though he too expected trouble. By late afternoon, Ethan stepped back, admiring a makeshift but solid wooden door. He'd replaced the broken planks with sturdier boards, adding extra hinges. Pride flickered in his chest. It wasn't perfect craftsmanship, but it beat leaving a gaping hole. He tested the handle, satisfied at how snugly it fit. "We're not so helpless," he told Valor, forcing a smile. The German shepherd stood, trotted over, and sniffed the new barrier. If Ethan didn't know better, he might have sworn the dog was approving the work. Still, the sun would set soon, and day 2 of this uneasy standoff would fade. What if they came at night again? He rehearsed his plan. Keep the phone close, watch for any headlights, rely on Vern's help. Not much of a plan, but more than nothing. Valor pressed his muzzle against Ethan's elbow, a small gesture of solidarity. Ethan knelt, giving the shepherd a gentle scratch behind the ears. "We'll face it together," he whispered, emboldened by the warm glow of the descending sun. The day had brought no direct confrontation, no new threats, and that felt like victory enough. Twilight stretched across the sky in bands of dusky pink as Ethan finished securing the new back door for the evening. His improvised repair job still smelled of fresh-cut lumber, and in the fading light, the wood gleamed with promise. He turned the latch to confirm its sturdiness a final time, exhaling with grim satisfaction when it held firm. Valor lingered at his side, the shepherd's intelligent eyes following every motion. Even though the dog limped slightly, he maintained that quiet vigilance, ears twitching at the faintest sound. Ethan straightened, gazing out at the yard bathed in the soft glow of approaching night. A breeze hissed through the pine boughs, stirring memories of that menacing silhouette by the fence. For 2 days, the threat had remained a shadowy undercurrent rather than a direct assault. Perhaps it would stay that way. He glanced down at Valor, ready to head in. The dog's tail wagged gently, acceptance in every line of his posture. Stepping into the kitchen, Ethan flipped on the overhead light, which cast long shadows across the floor. He grabbed Valor's medication from the counter, mixing it with leftover chicken. The shepherd ate with more appetite than before, clearly buoyed by the day's relative calm. Ethan allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, with the sheriff's passing patrol and the extra precautions, the intruders would decide it wasn't worth the trouble. He set aside his worries long enough to fry 2 eggs for his own dinner, though the tension in his stomach made food hard to enjoy. After the meal, Ethan moved to the living room, Valor padding close behind. The dog settled on a rug near the fireplace, where a small flame flickered, casting a gentle warmth. Picking up his phone, Ethan checked for messages. Nothing new from the sheriff. No more calls, threatening or otherwise. The emptiness of that was both a relief and a cause for unease. With Vern set to stop by later, at least he wouldn't spend the entire evening alone. He rummaged through one of the boxes in the corner, extracting an old radio. The device was dusty from disuse, but he managed to find batteries in a drawer. Soon, the static-laced hum of a local station filled the room, playing soft country music that made the house feel less cavernous. Valor's ears perked at the new noise, then relaxed when no danger emerged. An hour later, headlights swept across the front window and Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved to the door, ready with the chain lock in place, but recognized Vern's pickup. He ushered him inside, noticing how Vern's gaze flicked to the boarded windows. "You sure those boards will hold if someone really wants in?" the older man asked, setting down a small paper bag on a table. "I brought some sandwiches, by the way. Figured you might be low on supplies." Ethan's shoulders sagged with gratitude. "They'll hold for a while," he said, ignoring the flicker of doubt. "Thanks for the food. I wasn't sure I'd make it into town anytime soon." Vern handed him a ham and cheese sandwich, then crouched to greet Valor, who sniffed his jacket. "Hey there, boy," Vern murmured, stroking the dog's scruffy neck. "Looking better. Leg's still bothering him, though." Ethan nodded, mouth full. "He's healing, but Dr. West said it'll be a process." At least he's putting weight on it more comfortably. They sat at the kitchen table to eat. Ethan could hear the faint radio music drifting from the living room, something about lonely highways and old regrets. Vern tapped his fingers on the table, brow furrowed. "I drove all around the perimeter of your place," he said quietly. "Didn't see any sign of that SUV from the other night, no footprints by the fence. Maybe they're lying low for now." Ethan's heart eased fractionally. "Could be good news," he replied. "But I still can't figure out what they want from Valor besides using him for shady work. Why threaten me if all they want is a dog?" Vern shrugged. "Sometimes a single dog can hold valuable secrets, like special training or something smuggled, or it's about control. People who operate in the shadows don't like loose ends. That voicemail sure sounded like they wanted to scare you into compliance." He paused, glancing at Valor. "But we're stubborn folks out here, aren't we?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I guess so." Despite the attempt at lightness, the conversation left a heavy hush behind. Vern finished his sandwich, then rummaged in the paper bag. "I also brought a flashlight with extra batteries. Never know when the power might get cut out here." He extended it to Ethan, who accepted with thanks, remembering the flickering overhead lights from that first stormy night. "Think I'll stay until around midnight just in case," Vern added, leaning back in his chair. "No sense letting you fend for yourself if they decide to show up." Relief poured through Ethan, followed by a spike of guilt that he required so much help. "Thanks," he managed. "I'd appreciate the company." They cleaned up the plates and Vern followed Ethan into the living room where Valor had dozed off. The dog blinked awake when they entered, lifting his head in greeting. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling a loose shutter. Vern glanced at the boarded-up windows. "I'm no carpenter, but I could help reinforce those tomorrow," he said. "Just to be sure." Ethan's gratitude grew. "I'd like that," he replied softly. The hours slipped by as they talked in low voices about the land, the old orchard behind Ethan's house, and half-forgotten local rumors. They kept the radio volume low. Valor drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally lifting his nose at a stray crackle of static. Midnight approached, the wind outside settling into a disconcerting lull. At 12:15, Vern stood, stretching his shoulders. "Time I got home," he said, though his tone carried reluctance. Ethan walked him to the door, Valor trailing them with quiet steps. "We'll be all right," Ethan said, more for himself than for Vern. "Thanks for everything." Vern nodded, stepping onto the porch. "I'll check in tomorrow. Keep that phone close." He patted Ethan's arm and headed off. From the front window, Ethan watched Vern's taillights vanish down the driveway. The radio hummed behind him, playing a mournful guitar melody. Valor's gentle panting filled the silence where Vern's warmth had just been. The wind shifted again, making the shutters tremble. Each rattle caused Ethan's nerves to stir. "We'll get through the night," he murmured to Valor, switching off the radio. The dog gazed at him, unspoken trust in his eyes. He checked every window one last time, ensuring the boards were steady. Then he shut the lights, deciding to sleep in the living room again. He spread blankets on the couch and sank into them, exhaling shakily. Valor settled at his feet, half on the rug, half on Ethan's makeshift bedding. The flicker of the fireplace painted restless shadows across the walls. At around 2 in the morning, Ethan jerked awake to the sound of a muffled thud. His mind raced. Maybe it was the wind or a branch falling from a tree. Heart pounding, he slid carefully from the couch, grabbing the flashlight Vern had left. Valor was already up, ears pricked, hackles raised. The dog padded toward the front door, nose twitching. Ethan braced himself, shining the flashlight across the living room and toward the windows. Another dull thud made him jump. It came from outside, near the rear of the house. Valor let out a low growl, tension rippling through his body. Swallowing his fear, Ethan moved slowly, mindful that if intruders were out there, he needed to keep the element of surprise. He reached the kitchen, stepping lightly over the threshold. The new back door stood firm, no sign of forced entry. But the faint glow of the flashlight revealed something that made Ethan's stomach knot. A large dent in the fresh wood, as though struck with a heavy object. His breath caught. A second dent was visible below the first. Someone had hit the door, tested it, and then... What? Given up? Valor approached, nose to the gap at the door's lower edge. Another muffled sound, footsteps retreating across wet grass, reached Ethan's ears. Then all fell silent. Adrenaline fired through him, telling him to fling the door open and confront whoever lurked outside. But logic held him back. He had no idea how many there were, or what weapons they carried. He pressed his ear to the door, hearing only his own heartbeat, hammering in his chest. Slowly, he backed away, aware that Valor remained on high alert. "They're trying to break in again," Ethan whispered, voice trembling with anger and fear. He looked down at the dog. "Thanks to your tip, I woke up in time." The shepherd's eyes gleamed in the faint beam of the flashlight. A rush of determination flared inside Ethan. His options were limited. Call the sheriff's line and hope they'd respond quickly, or wait in tense vigilance, prepared to defend the property. He dialed the emergency number, wincing as it rang. A dispatcher answered, voice clipped. Ethan reported an attempted break-in, giving his address and the details. The dispatcher told him to stay put and remain on the line. Minutes crawled by. Valor whined, pacing the kitchen. Ethan heard nothing else outside, no voices or tools scraping the door. Perhaps the intruders realized the door was more solid than before. Or perhaps they decided to regroup, waiting for a chance to catch him off guard. The dispatcher's steady presence over the phone was a small comfort, but Ethan could almost hear the apologies forming on the other side of the line. The county's single patrol car was already on another call. They would send assistance as soon as possible. He ended the call, pressing his forehead against the wall in frustration. Another false dawn of hope, replaced by the reality that he was mostly on his own. Yet Valor stood there, unyielding, staring at the newly dented wood. The dog's gaze flicked to Ethan, as though reassuring him that they wouldn't face this alone. Determined to project confidence he didn't fully feel, Ethan made a show of double-checking the door's locks. He turned off the flashlight, plunging the kitchen into darkness, then led Valor back to the living room. "We keep watch here," he murmured. The shepherd settled beside him, posture rigid. Outside, the wind whispered among the pines, carrying secrets of unseen figures retreating into the night. Against his better judgment, exhaustion overtook him near 4 a.m. He nodded off intermittently, adrenaline spikes jerking him awake whenever a twig snapped or the house creaked. Each time, Valor rose, scanning the darkness, but no further attacks came. When the first pale glow of morning touched the windows, Ethan shuddered with relief. Another night had passed without a direct confrontation, yet the fresh dents in the door stood as an undeniable warning. These people wouldn't give up easily. Shivering with fatigue, Ethan placed a hand on Valor's back. "We did it," he whispered, not sure if he should feel triumphant or terrified. The shepherd leaned into his touch, silent as ever, but unwavering. In those steady brown eyes, Ethan saw the same grim resolve that pulsed in his own chest. The day would soon begin. The sheriff might eventually show up, and maybe Vern would have more advice. But for now, they had survived, forging a bond in the tense hours of darkness, a bond the enemy at the door had only strengthened. By the time the sun's first golden rays broke through the pines, Ethan realized he had barely slept. He sat slumped on the couch, the makeshift barricades casting angular shadows across the living room. Valor rested at his feet, alert despite obvious fatigue. Somewhere between 4 and 5 a.m, Ethan had drifted into a dazed half-sleep, only to lurch awake at every minor creak. Each time, he'd find the shepherd already on his paws, nose pointed toward the back door as if ready to ward off another intrusion. Now, in the hazy light of dawn, the tension in Ethan's muscles refused to ebb. He stretched carefully, groaning at his stiff neck. At 6:30, he mustered the will to stand. The new door bore 2 visible dents, vivid reminders of the night's close call. He thought of the phone call to the dispatcher, the distant promise of help. No one had shown up, though. It soured his mouth with bitterness. As he brewed coffee, an automatic response by now, he tried to rationalize. Maybe a bigger emergency kept the local forces busy. Still, it felt like a betrayal. Valor padded into the kitchen behind him, sniffing the floor for crumbs. When Ethan glanced down, the dog watched him steadily, an unspoken question in those brown eyes. "Yeah, I know," Ethan muttered, mixing the morning dose of antibiotics in a small bowl of shredded chicken. The shepherd ate it, tail wagging once. Despite everything, Ethan managed a small smile, touched by the dog's resilience. Outside, the yard looked deceptively peaceful in the soft morning glow. The boards on the windows cast long lines of shadow on the lawn. He flicked on his phone, verifying no new voicemails or texts had come in. Vern had promised to return sometime today, but there was no telling exactly when. Feeling a surge of restlessness, Ethan decided to check the perimeter himself. He coaxed Valor onto the porch, where the shepherd stood sniffing the crisp air. The night's tension still lay heavy on Ethan's chest, but the daylight gave him a measure of courage. Slowly, they circled the house, scanning for footprints. Sure enough, behind the replaced door, Ethan found deep impressions in the damp ground, boot prints. A few were smeared, but clearly from 1 or maybe 2 individuals. The prints led away into the tree line. His pulse quickened with anger as he imagined their frustration upon striking that new wood. Valor studied the tracks, ears perked. A faint rumble of a growl escaped him, like an echo of the confrontation that nearly erupted. Ethan crouched to inspect the footprints, then laid a hand on the dog's flank. "You did good last night," he murmured. "If you hadn't alerted me, they might have broken through." The shepherd turned, pressing his muzzle into Ethan's sleeve. For a fleeting moment, that small contact chased away the worst of his fear. Back inside, he wrote down everything he'd found. Timing, footprints, the dents, determined to have a clearer report for when the sheriff or Vern came by. The local station's limited resources left him uneasy, but he refused to be silent. After all, a formal paper trail might help if the intruders escalated things. He also decided to text Dr. West an update about Valor's condition. This time, she responded quickly. "Glad he's safe. Keep up the meds. If the leg shows redness or swelling, bring him in. Try to keep him calm." Ethan could almost smile at the irony. Calm was in short supply here. By 9, Vern's familiar pickup rumbled up the driveway. Ethan stepped out to greet him, and Valor followed, tail swaying carefully. The older man removed his cap, frowning at the worry lines etched into Ethan's face. "I saw your call log," Vern said softly. "Dispatch told me they couldn't free an officer last night." His voice held quiet anger. Ethan nodded, biting back a retort. Vern set a small toolbox on the porch. "Let's see to those boards. Then maybe you and I can walk that fence line. We'll document everything." They spent the better part of the morning reinforcing windows, checking nails, and adding extra slats for security. Sweat beaded on Ethan's forehead as he hammered. Despite the repetitive work, he took comfort in Vern's unhurried presence. Having someone else beside him made each echo of metal on wood less nerve-wracking. Valor dozed in a strip of sunlight, ears flicking whenever the hammering stopped. Once the house felt more secure, they ventured beyond the fence, stepping into the forest's edge. Ethan carried his phone, snapping pictures of the footprints still visible in the damp soil. Vern pointed out broken twigs and disturbed patches of moss. It seemed the intruders knew how to avoid leaving too many clues, but a few signs remained. At a certain spot near a thick oak, Valor froze, nose quivering. He let out a low rumble, hackles lifting. Ethan's heart rate spiked as he scanned the underbrush. Nothing moved among the ferns. He tried to peer deeper, but the thick canopy made it hard to see. Vern touched Ethan's shoulder. "Probably gone, but watch your back." They retreated, not wanting to be drawn into a potential ambush. Back at the house, Ethan loaded the pictures onto his computer, intending to send them to the sheriff. Vern hovered over his shoulder, arms folded. "I'll back you up on your statement," the older man said. "That's evidence of trespassing, maybe attempted burglary. They can't ignore that." Ethan clicked "attach" and typed a brief note detailing the second break-in attempt. Before he could lose his nerve, he sent the email to the sheriff's office. Vern left around noon, promising to return by nightfall. Ethan felt the hollow hush of the house close in on him as soon as the pickup's engine faded. Restless, he decided to reorganize the living room, pushing furniture to create an open space by the fireplace. Valor watched from a corner, occasionally standing to sniff a stack of books or a newly revealed patch of rug. When he moved a heavy armchair, Ethan accidentally bumped his shin against a crate. Pain flared. "Ow," he muttered, stepping back. Valor rose, trotting over with a worried whine, as though checking on him. Ethan managed to laugh. "I'm okay. Just clumsy." But the dog's concerned gaze warmed something in Ethan's chest. He realized how rarely anyone in his life had shown him sincere concern since his parents died. This battered shepherd, who'd forced his way in just days ago, now offered a sense of solace Ethan couldn't quite put into words. Around 2, the phone rang with a number Ethan recognized as the sheriff's office. He nearly dropped the receiver in haste. Sheriff Dunn's gruff tone sounded slightly more attentive this time. "Received your photos," Dunn said. "Can't promise immediate action, but I'll send a deputy out tomorrow morning to have a closer look. Meanwhile, keep your doors locked. If you hear or see anything tonight, call us. We'll do our best." Ethan's frustration flared. They were here last night. What if they come again? A pause. Then the sheriff sighed. "I understand your concern, Mr. Walker, but we've got 2 major incidents in the county right now. Do your best to stay safe until tomorrow. I'll make sure the deputy shows up." Before Ethan could protest further, Dunn ended the call. Setting the phone down, Ethan felt his gut coil in anger. Another night alone, reliant on flimsy security and Vern's goodwill. He turned to Valor, who approached as though sensing Ethan's agitation. Resting a hand on the shepherd's sturdy shoulder, Ethan whispered, "It's you and me again tonight, buddy. Let's hope they don't try anything worse." The afternoon hours stretched. Ethan tried to distract himself by scanning local websites for any mention of missing guard dogs or suspicious activity. He found nothing conclusive. A few references to illegal dog handling in a neighboring county, but no direct leads. He also tried searching for clues about specialized training facilities. Valor's posture, the way he responded to certain commands, like stay, hinted he might have been taught more than the average pet. But everything remained guesswork. Eventually, the effort drained him. He closed the laptop and stepped outside for air. The day had turned bright, a soft breeze carrying the scent of pine resin. Valor followed him onto the porch, settling at the top step. Ethan admired how the dogs seemed at home here, as if they'd lived together for years. Maybe, he realized, the bond they'd forged under duress ran deeper than typical acquaintanceship. They had faced actual danger side by side. For a moment, he let the warmth of the sun caress his face, allowing a fragile hope that tonight might pass without incident. Vern would come. The boards were strong. The sheriff had promised a deputy in the morning. He repeated those facts like a mantra, ignoring the dread that coiled at the back of his mind. By late afternoon, Ethan decided to see if Valor would engage in gentle play. He found a battered tennis ball and a box of random items he'd unpacked. Outside, in a patch of grass, he tossed it lightly. Valor watched it bounce, then limped over to retrieve it, tail wagging. Ethan laughed softly, the sound alien in his own ears. It felt good to break from the cycle of vigilance, if only for a few minutes. He gently took the ball from Valor's mouth, noticing once again how careful the shepherd was not to bite too hard. Perhaps his training had taught him restraint. As dusk approached, Ethan's chest tightened. Every shape in the yard grew elongated, shadows creeping across the grass. He prepared dinner, sharing a few scraps with Valor, who devoured them happily. The dog's legs seemed less tender, though Ethan didn't want him running around. The memory of those footprints behind the door, the fresh dents, weighed on him like an anchor. He tried to distract himself with small tasks, humming half-heartedly. Evening advanced, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. No sign of Vern yet, but Ethan expected him soon. He paused in the living room, turning on several lamps, unwilling to endure the darkness again without extra light. Valor settled near the front door, standing watch. Now and then, the shepherd let out a quiet huff, as if testing the air for unwanted guests. Minutes crawled. The clock ticked louder than usual. By the time it was fully dark, Ethan's phone remained silent. He stared at it, willing it to ring. Perhaps Vern had been delayed or called away. Anxious, Ethan flicked on the porch light, which illuminated the yard in a dim circle of safety. Still, the rest of the property lay in blackness. Valor's ears twitched. Ethan ran a trembling hand over the dog's back. "He's probably just late, right?" Valor blinked up at him. Outside, a faint wind stirred the branches. The hush pressed in. Ethan braced himself. Another night awaited. Another test of resilience. Drawing a slow breath, he whispered, "We faced them before. We can do it again." Yet a grim intuition whispered that the intruders might escalate. After all, they'd left fresh damage on the new door. They knew he was determined. Perhaps they suspected Ethan had told the authorities. The scenario churned in his head, unraveling any semblance of calm. In Valor's steady presence, however, Ethan took courage. The house stood, battered but unbroken, just like the shepherd who refused to yield. Night stretched across the property like a thin veil, each passing minute settling the landscape into deeper shadows. Ethan flicked through the local news on his phone, hoping to calm his nerves, but no mention of suspicious vehicles or attempted break-ins surfaced. The unwelcome possibility remained that Vern's delay had nothing to do with mere inconvenience. Every so often, Ethan would step onto the porch, scanning the driveway for headlights that never appeared, his breath visible in the cooling air. He kept a flashlight in hand, ready in case he heard footsteps crunching over the gravel. Valor paced restlessly around the living room, then stopped by the front door, sniffing the baseboards. The shepherd's muscles were taut, as though expecting trouble. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, trying to project reassurance. "We're going to be fine," he murmured, though he couldn't banish the tightness in his chest. The dog gave a low rumble, tail flicking in agitation. Outside, a hush pressed down, and even the wind seemed to withdraw, leaving only the faint scrape of a tree branch against the house. Around 9:30, Ethan's phone buzzed. He lunged for it, relief surging, hoping to see Vern's name. Instead, an unknown number flashed across the screen. Heart hammering, he answered. A burst of static made him strain to hear. "Mr. Walker," a male voice said, clipped and calm, "you have forced our hand. We wanted this resolved quietly, but you have involved the authorities." Ethan's skin crawled. This was the same voice as before, the same cold undertone. He swallowed, trying to steady himself. "I'm not giving you the dog," he managed, forcing steel into his tone. A short silence followed. He could hear a muffled conversation in the background, perhaps more than one person was present. Then the voice returned. "We do not need your cooperation. We only need what belongs to us. Last warning, open your doors, and no one gets hurt." Ethan's anger spiked, overshadowing his fear. "He's not your property," he spat, but the line went dead before he could say more. For a moment, he stood there, phone in hand, pulse thudding so loudly he could hardly think. Valor approached, whining in concern. Ethan's knees felt unsteady, a swirl of dread overtaking him. Finally, he found the presence of mind to call the sheriff's number again. It rang, then went to voicemail. He tried once more. Same result. He left a tense message about the new threat, urging them to come quickly. His eyes darted toward the front window, half expecting to see shadows creeping closer. Trying to maintain composure, he set up a small perimeter of lights. He turned on lamps in every room, wanting no dark corners for intruders to hide. Valor followed his every movement, limping only slightly now. Ethan paused by the back door, running a hand over the dents that testified to the previous attempt. "They're threatening us again," he told the dog. "We have to be ready." He dug through his parents' old closet and, with a tremor, pulled out a baseball bat, one his father had once used in a local league decades ago. It wasn't a firearm, but it was something to grip if they forced their way in. Minutes passed in excruciating slowness. Ethan's mind reeled with questions. Where was Vern? Had these people intercepted him somehow, or was he simply running late? The sense of being cornered grew with each tick of the clock. Despite the lamp in every room, the house felt darker than ever. He posted himself in the front hallway, phone in his pocket, and Valor at his side. Outside, the moonless sky offered no comfort, and the yard was an expanse of black shadows. Then, at roughly 10:15, distant headlights flickered through the trees. Ethan held his breath. The light bobbed as though moving along the dirt road, then cut out abruptly. He dashed to the window, careful to stay low. Valor pressed his muzzle to the glass, ears straining forward. In the faint glow from the porch, Ethan glimpsed movement near the fence line. Shapes, 2 or 3, crossing onto his property. The intruders. He scrambled back, heart pounding. He dialed 911 again, whispering urgently that people were on his property, approaching with probable intent to break in. The dispatcher recognized his address and promised to send a car. But Ethan heard the hesitation. Help was not guaranteed to arrive soon. Ending the call, he steadied the baseball bat in sweaty palms. A dull thud sounded at the back of the house, then a metallic rattle, as though they tested the windows or hammered at the boards. Valor let out a deep bark, hackles raised. The barks echoed, momentarily drowning out the pounding. Another thud, heavier. Ethan recalled the 2 dents from before and braced for the possibility that they might now bring tools. Suddenly, glass shattered from the side window. A jolt of panic coursed through Ethan. The boards were meant to secure the interior, but it seemed one corner had come loose. Valor dashed toward the noise, barking furiously. Ethan followed, bat in hand, flicking on his flashlight. Through the broken pane, he saw a masked figure attempting to pry away the boards. The man's eyes glinted with determination as he wedged a crowbar into the gap. Valor snarled, front legs braced. Without hesitation, Ethan sprang forward, swinging the bat at the crowbar. The metal made a clang, jarring his arms. "Get out!" he yelled, adrenaline pulsing. The man recoiled, cursing under his breath. For a split second, their gazes locked through the fractured window. Then the intruder kicked at the board, sending splinters flying. Valor lunged, jaws snapping inches from the man's gloved hand. The crowbar clanged against the window frame again, but the angle was awkward. Ethan took advantage of that moment, smashing the bat once more. The man yelped and jerked back, losing his grip. Ethan heard another noise from the front porch, a second intruder testing the main entrance. He realized with horror that the group was coordinating from multiple angles. He scrambled to the living room, Valor at his heels, nearly tripping over an end table in the chaos. Another masked figure was working the lock on the front door with something that glinted in the porch light. Ethan's hands shook as he prepared to defend that entry too. "Stay away!" he shouted. Through the door, the silhouette turned, stepping back. Then the person slammed a boot against the door, testing the newly reinforced wood. Valor bounded to the door, barking so savagely it sent shivers down Ethan's spine. The lock rattled, but the door held. Another blow. Splinters began to crack near the doorknob. Ethan realized with dread that raw force might give them access if the boards didn't hold. He braced the bat under his arm, fumbling for the phone in his pocket again. He dialed Vern's number this time, praying for a miracle. No answer. Fear twisted in his gut, images of Vern lying helpless on some remote roadside. A third intruder's voice carried from outside, "Break the boards, get the dog, move!" The words were sharp, accompanied by a renewed barrage of pounding at the side window. Ethan ran back and forth between the living room and the hallway, mind racing. He couldn't guard every vulnerability at once. Valor trotted behind him, barking ferociously each time they reached a threatened point. The next few minutes blurred. Wood began to crack at the side window's frame. The front door groaned under repeated kicks. The entire house reverberated with the force of their assault. Ethan's arms felt numb from brandishing the bat, fighting off prying tools. Glass shards scattered across the floor from each impact. His breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline fueling his every motion. Suddenly, the front door gave way at the lock. The intruder's boot had split the wood around the knob, leaving only the interior boards as a barrier. Ethan whirled, brandishing the bat like a lifeline. Valor's growls escalated, and the dog positioned himself directly in front of the battered door. Without thinking, Ethan reached for the knob to hold it, but the door jerked open an inch despite his effort. A gloved hand reached through, trying to dislodge the remaining plank. In a burst of desperation, Valor lunged forward, teeth snapping at the intruder's hand. The masked figure snarled, retreating with a string of curses. The door slammed shut, but Ethan knew that was only a moment's respite. "Out of the way, boy," he gasped, sliding a chair beneath the doorknob in a hasty wedge. Crude though it was, it might buy another minute. Then, from the side window, a heavier crack signaled someone making real progress on those boards. Ethan realized that each second brought them closer to breaching the house. Over the thunderous pounding, a muffled roar of engines came from somewhere in the distance, followed by the unmistakable glare of headlights sweeping across the yard. For an instant, Ethan's heart soared, thinking it might be the sheriff. The intruders must have noticed too, because the pounding ceased abruptly. Through the fractured glass of the side window, he glimpsed a person stepping back, eyes flicking over to the driveway. The rumble of an engine grew louder, headlights brightening. Ethan, chest heaving, stood near the front door, Valor pressed to his side. A standoff of silence lingered, broken only by their ragged breathing. Then footsteps pounded across the porch. The intruders fled, leaping off the steps and darting into the darkness. Ethan watched from the window as a pair of vehicles screeched to a halt near the fence. Doors slammed. He saw beams of flashlights cutting across the yard and faint shouts. Someone yelled, "Stop! Hands up!" The night erupted with confusion, barking, footsteps, frantic rustling in the bushes. Shaking with relief and residual terror, Ethan gripped Valor's collar, ensuring the dog didn't dash into danger. Through the battered remains of the window, he recognized the shape of a patrol car, lights swirling in the gloom. Another truck, which looked suspiciously like Vern's, was parked behind it. Figures in uniform converged, their flashlights bouncing across the yard. Ethan sagged against the wall, the bat slipping from his fingers. It clattered on the floor. Valor whined softly, still braced for a fight. The next few minutes felt surreal. The battered front door swung open, revealing Sheriff Dunn, face grim, pistol drawn. Two deputies followed, scanning for intruders inside. Ethan raised his hands automatically, shoulders trembling. Valor remained at his side, panting. "It's just us," Ethan said hoarsely. "They ran out back." Dunn's gaze flickered around the chaotic scene. Splintered boards, broken glass, the torn door. He motioned to his deputies, who rushed toward the rear of the house. Vern appeared moments later, breathless, an anxious look in his eyes. He nearly collided with the sheriff in the hallway. "Ethan," he called, voice shaking. "You all right?" Ethan tried to speak, but words wouldn't form. Relief and shock coiled in his chest, leaving him dizzy. Vern reached him, gripping his shoulder. Valor pressed close, as though reassuring them both. Outside, the deputies' shouts mingled with the snap of twigs underfoot. At least one intruder could be heard crashing through the brush. Another set of headlights illuminated the driveway. Backup, perhaps. In the swirl of chaos, Ethan realized they were safe for the moment. The intruders had been driven off. The authorities had finally arrived. He closed his eyes, inhaling shakily. Everything felt surreal, the violence, the abrupt shift to rescue. Dunn's voice was a low murmur. "Sit down, catch your breath. We'll handle it." But Ethan wasn't sure how to handle the flood of emotions. He sank to the living room floor, Valor curling beside him. Vern crouched, patting Ethan's back awkwardly. Outside, flashlights bobbed among the trees, seeking the men who had tried so hard to seize Valor. The dog nudged Ethan's hand, a quiet presence amid the wreckage. Another wave of relief hit him. They had come so close to losing everything, yet here they were, breathing, battered but unbroken. Half an hour later, the shattered calm of Ethan's house had been replaced by the bustle of law enforcement. Sheriff Dunn's deputies moved in and out, gathering shards of broken glass, photographing footprints, and jotting notes. Vern had borrowed a broom from the kitchen to clear away the worst of the debris. A paramedic, summoned by the sheriff's call for backup, checked Ethan for shock and found his vitals within acceptable range despite his trembling nerves. Valor rested at Ethan's side, watchful but calmer now that uniforms crowded the property. "Did you get any of them?" Ethan asked, voice still raw. He sat on a dining chair, his back to the wall, refusing to relax his posture. He could see the fresh gouges in the side window frame from a crowbar or some similar tool. Dunn shook his head, tucking a notepad into his jacket pocket. "My deputies chased two individuals into the trees, but they managed to slip away. We've got tire tracks off a side access road, likely how they made their escape. Third suspect might have fled another way, but we'll comb the area further." He studied Ethan with a stern, concerned gaze. "Looks like they really wanted that dog. You said on the phone they threatened you again?" Ethan recounted the call in brief detail. "They said he belongs to them, but after seeing how they operate, I'm more convinced than ever he was taken or bred for some illegal purpose. He's not safe with them." He gripped the armrests of the chair, knuckles whitening at the memory of the crowbar prying at his home. Dunn rubbed his jaw. "We'll try to trace that phone, but these folks seem practiced at covering their tracks. At least now we have enough evidence to open a formal investigation. Attempted burglary, property damage, possible connections to illegal dog rings. I'll see to it personally." A flicker of relief crossed Ethan's face. In the corner, Vern helped a deputy measure the footprints by the back door. Dunn nodded toward them. "You ought to stay somewhere else for a few days while we sort this out. A friend or relative in town? It might be safer than waiting here for another assault." The notion struck Ethan's tired brain like a blow. Leave the house, his parents' property which he'd worked so hard to secure, the dog limping at his side, needing ongoing care and rest? He glanced at Vern, who caught his eye. "You're welcome to come to my place," Vern offered slowly, though a worried crease formed on his brow. I've got a decent fence and you'd have company. Harder for them to get at you." For a moment, Ethan considered it. Yet the thought of fleeing made his stomach churn. "I appreciate it," he said, voice unsteady. "But this is my home now. If I keep running, what's next? How long before I can come back?" He shook his head, shoulders slumping. If the sheriff's investigating and they know the law is involved, maybe they won't be so brazen again. Vern's frown deepened, but Sheriff Dunn spoke quietly. "I understand your reluctance to leave, Mr. Walker, but these criminals are determined. Mark my words, if they think they can scare you off or seize the dog, they might try again. Unless we find them first, it's risky staying here." Exhaustion weighed on Ethan's every muscle. He looked at Valor, who gazed back, ear flicking at the presence of so many strangers. The shepherd had endured repeated trauma, pinned between a brutal past and these men who would not give up. Ethan hardened his resolve. "We'll manage," he said, as firmly as he could. "With all the evidence you've gathered, they might think twice about returning, and I can't abandon Valor to their mercy." Dunn studied him for several seconds, then gave a grudging nod. "All right, we won't force you, but keep your phone on you at all times, and you call if you so much as hear a twig snap wrong." He gestured toward a deputy. "We'll leave someone stationed on the road for the next couple of nights at least. A visible presence might deter them." A wave of gratitude washed over Ethan. "Thank you," he murmured. If the sheriff had suggested that mere hours earlier, perhaps last night's ambush could have been avoided. Still, better late than never. The adrenaline slowly drained from Ethan's system as he wandered through his battered home. The front door hung crookedly on its hinges, the side windows' boards half splintered. The living room floor was a patchwork of broken glass and wood splinters that Vern swept into piles. It would take days, weeks maybe, to fix all this properly. A quiet fury brewed within him, not just at the intruders, but at the helpless feeling that he was merely reacting to their assaults. Meanwhile, Valor followed him room to room, limping a bit more from all the stress. A deputy named Reyes approached Ethan near the kitchen. "You saved your own life, you know," she said gently, noticing the baseball bat still leaning against the counter. "Had you not prepared, they might have gotten in before we arrived." Her eyes shifted to Valor. "And that shepherd's a fighter. Good to have him on your side." "It's mutual," Ethan replied quietly, scratching behind Valor's ear. "I'm not letting anyone take him." By the time the sheriff and the others departed, it was close to 3 a.m. Vern lingered last, pressing a new set of deadbolt locks into Ethan's hands. "I brought these in case you decide to upgrade your doors. I'll come back after I've rested a bit." He hesitated, eyes lingering on the battered window. "Sure you won't come with me tonight?" Ethan placed a hand on Vern's shoulder, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, but I need to stay. This house, my parents, it's all I have left. I won't let these thugs drive me away." Vern gave him a reluctant hug, nodded, and promised to return the next day with tools and reinforcements. At last they were alone. Ethan, Valor, and a house still trembling from the violent intrusion. Broken glass and splinters had been swept aside, but everything felt raw and exposed. Ethan carried the baseball bat to the bedroom and set it by the nightstand, then coaxed Valor onto a cushioned blanket on the floor. The shepherd, though exhausted, still showed signs of restlessness, as if he remained ready for a sudden return of the danger. Ethan undressed mechanically, changing into fresh clothes, just soft old sweatpants and a t-shirt. His limbs shook with residual tension, the weight of survival pressing in. Slumping on the edge of his bed, he took a moment to process. The intruders had nearly succeeded, but backup had finally arrived in the nick of time. Would they return, or had the confrontation left them discouraged? With police presence now in the area, maybe they'd retreat, seeking less risky targets. Then he thought of them prowling the woods, fueled by rage at being thwarted yet again. He gazed at Valor, who lay with half-closed eyes. In that dog's battered body lay a fierce will to live free. The knowledge that they'd fought side by side, man and dog, buoyed Ethan's weary spirit. He remembered Dr. West's guess that Valor might have been trained. She was right. The dog's guarded posture, quick reaction, and controlled biting made sense, but they also revealed a past overshadowed by strict discipline or even abuse. Ethan shuddered to think how far these criminals would go to reclaim him. Time bled into a restless dawn. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by nightmares of men in masks tearing through the door, crowbars glinting in the dark. Each time Ethan jolted awake, Valor lifted his head, blinking in quiet solidarity. At one point, as dawn's early light tinted the sky outside the broken window, Ethan swung his legs over the bed and joined the dog on the floor, running trembling fingers through Valor's fur. It was softer than he'd imagined, despite the scars. The shepherd let out a contented huff, nuzzling closer. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, voice catching in his throat. "For warning me, for protecting me, for staying." The dog blinked, eyes warm with a gentleness that contradicted his fierce defense of the house. A silent understanding hung between them. If the intruders came again, they would face the same unified front, more determined, more prepared. When daylight finally broke in earnest, Ethan rose to inspect the damage more clearly. The front door needed new hinges, and the side window required total replacement. Gouges in the wood revealed how close the crowbar had come to dislodging the boards. He stepped onto the porch, greeted by a small circle of flattened grass where the intruders must have stood. The yard bore footprints everywhere, a stark reminder of the previous night's siege. But near the fence, he spotted a police cruiser parked discreetly under a large oak, a uniformed deputy leaning against the hood. It was Reyes. She raised a hand in greeting, telling him silently that for now, he wasn't alone. That sight made tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Finally, real help. He called out a "Good morning," voice shaky, and she waved back. He felt Valor's presence at his heel. The dog snuffled the air, then gently bumped Ethan's calf as if to say, "We've got this." An hour later, Vern's truck rattled up the driveway. True to his word, he had returned with a heavy box of supplies: hinges, sheets of plywood, a new doorknob, and a caddy of basic tools. "Let's fix this house up right," he announced, determined. Sheriff Dunn stopped by shortly after, relaying that although no arrests had been made, the perimeter would be patrolled thoroughly. Meanwhile, Vern and Ethan spent the day reinforcing, hammering, measuring, and patching. Each stroke of the hammer felt cathartic, driving back the lingering echoes of fear. Dr. West came at midday, checking on Valor's leg. The shepherd, though tired, seemed in stable spirits, and Dr. West praised Ethan for his dedicated care. She stayed a while, offering conversation and moral support, then departed with a promise to find a safe haven if circumstances got worse. By sundown, the worst of the damage was repaired or at least boarded over, and Vern headed home once again, leaving Ethan and Valor to face the night with renewed resolve. As dusk enveloped the land, Ethan stood outside, leaning on the porch rail. He watched the silhouettes of pines darken against the fiery sky. Inside, the house was far from perfect. Scratches, dents, new boards hammered on windows, but he felt strangely anchored. A quiet strength pulsed inside him. He glanced at Valor, who eyed the yard as if daring any threat to emerge. They had lived through 2 nights of terror. The authorities were now engaged, and Vern stood beside them. Even the local vet had extended her kindness, and in those small alliances, Ethan discovered how resilience could flourish. He placed a palm on Valor's sturdy back, the dog's fur rustling with the gentle breeze. "We're staying," Ethan said, voice soft but resolute. "This is our home." The shepherd gazed up at him, tail wagging once, It was all the answer Ethan needed.